First, I want you to know I have staff here. Ben Fritsch, you may know, because he is the communications director. Brad Truding, who is my chief counsel. Trent Holbrook and Portia Boone. Where are they? Where are they? Are they here? There they are. I want to thank all of you for joining us in the Capitol. We come here every single year, and we alert the Congress that we will keep coming until they no longer intrude into the district's home rule authority or grant the District of Columbia statehood, whichever comes first. I want to particularly thank Mayor Bowser, and Chairman Mendelson has also joined us, as well as our speakers, and that there are others who will not speak, but are a part of our coalition for self-defense against members of Congress who intrude on the rights of the members, who intrude on the rights of the District of Columbia. Those who are here but are not speaking but are much appreciated and are equal partners in this fight are, all above all, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, Catholics for Choice, Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Compassion and Choice, MJ, that's our marijuana folks, and NARAL Pro-Choice America. Thank you very much for being here and showing your solidarity with us when we will need you most. I want to give a special welcome to Aaron King. You'll hear from him soon. He is a student at Woodrow Wilson High School. This is the first time we have had a student at this annual meeting. Aaron is coordinating students across the district for Town Meeting for Our Lives. We are going to have one of those meetings whenever Aaron tells us to come forward. We have seen his presence and the presence of thousands of students from across the United States, all of whom we count as allies in our fight to retain the gun laws as the District of Columbia wishes them. I thank Aaron for showing Congress that there is a new breed of activists that have joined the struggle for sensible gun reform, and that will be with us as we fight these repeated attempts by Congress to literally eliminate all of the district's local gun laws. Today we're going on the offensive. As the fiscal year 2019 appropriation process approaches, it's not begun yet. We've just come out of the first session. During that session, we had more attempts on the district's local gun laws than we have seen in recent memory. So we're stepping forward to say just don't even try it. Yet, and it is important for you to know, we don't just come here and nothing happens. We continue to make progress. When I first came to Congress, the House actually held hearings on the district's budget. What a waste of time. And that was as if this was just another congressional bill. And that was notwithstanding the Home Rule Act that was passed many years before I even came to Congress. Look, D.C. may not have the same rights as other jurisdictions, but fighting together, we have eliminated those hearings, and we've even eliminated the subcommittee that held those hearings. So we have to note our progress for you to understand that though we don't have the same rights as other Americans, that does not leave us powerless to fight for our rights. The coalition has helped us to defeat most bills, as well as appropriation riders, that have sought to overturn the district's laws. But it is as if on cue. There are representatives, there are members of Congress, all of them Republicans, who continue to abuse what remains of their authority over the city. They either co-sponsor bills or amendments to overturn the district's gun laws. Here is their goal. Why do they do this? They want financial contributions that are connected with, as they see it, the bill they want overturned. They want to satisfy special interests who lobby them. They want to raise their profile back home. I tell you, we help them raise it because we go after them on social media and every other which way we can think. The attacks take two forms. Sometimes they start with standalone bills, but that has to go through the House and Senate. We are pretty easily able to stop those bills. More often, our Republican friends turn to the appropriation process. That process serves as the backstop for meddling in the district's home rule authority. As you will hear from our speakers today, many of these are perennial attacks. They blossom every spring as the appropriation period dawns. And these are simply bills where some Republicans disagree with our D.C. Council. We are a progressive jurisdiction. We will not be in sync with every district in the United States. I thought that's what federalism was all about. Our coalition should not be discouraged by the attacks that recur because this shows our success in blocking them. So they've had to come yet again, and we're going to block them yet again. Today, the coalition will discuss 5 amendments, or riders as we call them. We have defeated most of these before and expect success again with the unified help of the coalition and our district leaders. Perhaps the most persistent is also the most dangerous, and that is the Republican attempt to wipe out every single one of the district's own local gun laws. Avery Gardner of the Brady Campaign and Center to Prevent Gun Violence will speak about the attacks launched this year by Marco Rubio. That's where Parkland, Florida is, people. And Representatives Tom Garrett and Thomas Massey. Aaron King of Woodrow Wilson High School will then speak on the impact of guns in D.C. and what he and his fellow students are doing to stop intrusion so that we are safe from further gun violence. Georgianne Yusova of the American Civil Liberties Union will discuss efforts to protect the district's Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Act. We call it RHNDA. It prohibits employers in the district from discriminating against employees or their spouses or dependents based on their reproductive health decisions. With the coalition's help, we have preserved RHNDA for 3 consecutive fiscal years and fully expect to do so again. So RHNDA is a perfect example of how they keep trying, and often these are not the same member, maybe a freshman member who may not have yet felt the sting of the coalition and our efforts, or it may be just an issue that Republicans deem to be particularly important. Mark Glaze of the Death with Dignity National Center will outline the newest anti-DC attack. This is an attack on district's medical aid in dying law. It's called the Death with Dignity Act. We have protected this law twice already, And one of the ways we've done it is to highlight two members who come from states which have precisely this same law. Finally, we will hear about the two longest-standing riders. Dana Singster of Planned Parenthood for America on the rider blocking D.C. from spending its own local funds on abortion for low-income women, and Caitlin Bowker of the Drug Policy Alliance for the rider blocking the district from spending its local funds on commercializing marijuana. We recognize that it will likely take a Democratic House to remove those two riders, but that possibility is in sight. New riders may yet come during the appropriation process that we know nothing of. Last year, we encountered a brand new rider offered by Representative Andy Harris of Maryland. That rider was to block D.C.'s law regulating the labeling of personal hygiene products, really? Particularly wet wipes, as safe to flush in your toilets. That show you they'll stoop low. But the council understood this as a local matter, having to do with our own sewage system. One wonders what interest the Congress could have in such a matter until we look at the corporation who passes out funds to members who support such bills. We made a big deal of this one, and Andy Harris ultimately withdrew his amendment, indicating, I think, our actions indicate nobody gets a free pass, and we will continue to tell them to go flush all those anti-DC riders. In addition, we have kept two standalone bills from moving. Representative Steve King has introduced an anti-labor bill that would apply only to the District of Columbia. And there's another introduced by Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Mark Meadows to radically alter our local education system by requiring the District of Columbia to spend its local funds for students to attend private schools. Today, we are beginning before the appropriation process does, so that Congress faces a fully coordinated effort by our coalition, the mayor, the D.C. Council, D.C. students, and residents to repeat our past successes and, most importantly, to warn against further intrusions. If Congress is inclined to focus on the district, we urge members to pass our bill to make the District of Columbia the 51st state. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased that Mayor Bowser has come to the Capitol today, and I'm asking Mayor Bowser to speak to you at this time.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Congresswoman Norton, thank you for inviting us here. Chairman Mendelson, I also want to thank you for your presence here today. I was just telling folks before we walked in, I can't believe it's been a year since we've been here, but we've had a year to focus on continuing to fight for the full American participation of the 700,000 residents of the district. I too want to acknowledge my federal and regional affairs team led by Beverly Perry, Eugene Kinlow, and Tomas Talamante, and my budget director, Jenny Reed, has also joined us today. We know that our city is self-sufficient. run better than most, balanced budgets, clean audits, and paying more federal taxes per capita than most jurisdictions. We know that our residents participate in every other way, in addition to paying taxes, participating in our national defense, and even sacrificing their lives. Our residents have the particular indignity of driving around, living around, and working in this Capitol without voting senators and without our Congresswoman having the vote. And we will speak up and stand up about this indignity and this affront to our democracy every chance that we can. The Congresswoman is absolutely right in that every year we're focused on keeping the Congress's hands off the things that matter to D.C. residents and what have been rightfully implemented by our legislature and signed by me to become the law of the land in the District of Columbia. And we will continue to focus on those things. At the same time, we know that the Congress does have interest in the district, and we want them to take care of those interests, particularly their parks and bridges and infrastructure that affect our daily lives in Washington, D.C. The first thing that I want to talk about is what has been supported in a bipartisan way in this Congress. It did not appear in the president's bill, and our Congresswoman is working very hard to make sure that the Congress continues to support full funding for DC TAG. This is an important and has been an important part of the district's public education system. We also want to focus on our local gun laws. And I know that our chairman will talk a lot about what we have done over the years to pass the laws that we think will keep D.C. residents and D.C. neighborhoods safe. We were together just a few weeks ago talking about the legislation that we hope will move in Florida. While we don't think it's enough, we think it's a step in the right direction. And we think it's directly opposed to the views that Senator Marco Rubio has expressed when it comes to the District of Columbia. So what we want to tell him is you can't have one view in Florida and another view here in Washington, D.C. So we want to tell Senator Marco Rubio to keep his hands off D.C. gun laws. We know, too, that the Congresswoman has outlined many other ways that our local laws are under attack. We have achieved budget autonomy. We do run our government in a way that is prudent and is allowing us to grow and to become one of the most vibrant cities in the world. And we can do even better if we know that the Congress cannot interfere in the locally approved laws of Washington, D.C. So I look forward to working with you, Congresswoman, in this coalition that is so vital to what we do. What we know about this coalition is you help us multiply the 700,000 voices in Washington, D.C. To your constituencies all across the United States of America. Not only are you talking to them about statehood for Washington, D.C., and how we have more sponsors than we've ever had before, and how we have approved our Constitution and new boundaries, and how we are ready for this Congress to admit us as the 51st state. You can also talk to them about the issues that we share that make us no different than any other American, but we are threatened by legislators from other jurisdictions. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bowser, and thank you for mentioning DC TAG. This is the bill that is allowing our young people to go to college in all 50 states. And the reason that this bill is so important to us is that it has helped us to retain residents in the District of Columbia. I do want to say that this is the first time the president hasn't put it in his budget. And I understand I've been in the minority for most of my years in the Congress, and yet we passed this bill, this DC TAG bill, whether or not the president was Republican or Democratic, and whether or not the House and the Senate was Republican or Democratic, which tells you the kind of support we have, and I fully expect we'll be able to get the full $40 million we're asking for this year. Chairman Mendelson has also joined us, and I'm going to ask him to speak for the council.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Congresswoman Norton. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you all for being here. I'm here because I think it's important that the full district government is making a statement with our Congresswoman with regard to hands-off DC and these appropriation riders. The Congress continues to insist on passing our budget, even though we now have budget autonomy, which has been upheld by the courts. But let's look at what Congress has done when it passes our budget. For easily a decade, if not 2 decades, Congress has not changed 1 penny in our local dollars, not 1 penny. Since the 1990s, Congress maybe has passed an Appropriation Act for the District of Columbia on time 4 times. But they do insist on having this appropriation bill on which they attach these riders. Now, I like to think of it this way with this metaphor. In 1974, Congress gave us limited home rule, maybe 60, 70% of what the district government needs in order to fully govern our jurisdiction. They didn't give us everything. They wanted to hold back so that they still had control over some important measures. But to me, and this is the metaphor, it's like they closed the door and they shut down shop. So there's no committee, and that's a good thing. And there's no oversight, and that's a good thing. But they still retain jurisdiction over certain measures that we don't, like, for instance, Title 11 of the DC Code. And so when there's a need on the local level, then we can't address it, or we can't address it fully. We come up to Congress, we knock on the door, and there's nobody who will answer. There's nobody there behind the door. There's no committee. There's nothing. And that's where these riders become particularly pernicious. Because if you think about it, and this is the way I want folks to think about it, any aspect of lawmaking has to be in the context of the full process, the full context of governing a jurisdiction. And so when Congress steps in, and I'll give the example of needle exchange because this offended some folks, and so they felt that the best thing was to prohibit needle exchange. Well, they didn't deal with the rest of the healthcare system. In fact, they didn't deal with anything else in the District of Columbia. But meanwhile, the incidence of HIV infection skyrocketed. You can't just hold back, not answer the door, and then just, I don't even want to say cherry pick, because it's not the best things, it's actually kind of the worst things, that they then decide to have a hand in. And that's what these riders are about. So needle exchange hurt public health in the District of Columbia. I'd argue that not medical, but marijuana, there was a rider on medical marijuana for a number of years, but with marijuana, that's not just a matter of public health, but public safety as well. And so here we are in this ridiculous situation where we've made it legal for folks to possess and use small quantities of marijuana in private, but we can't regulate it at all. We're the only jurisdiction in the country. Can't regulate it at all, not in any way whatsoever. And that makes no sense from the standpoint of any jurisdiction, or in the area of public safety with gun control. So Congress, they're not doing anything else with regard to public safety in the district, doing anything else with regard to helping our police department. Actually, in some ways, with the ATF restrictions, they hinder our police department. But the point is that some members want to swoop in and start regulating in that area, and not just simply saying what is or is not legal in terms of guns, but actually to take away our authority to legislate in that area. But then they're not going to step in at all with the greater context of public safety. I think, Congresswoman Norton, when she talked about the wet wipes, and it was sort of amusing, but it does illustrate the point, which is that we have a city that we're running. And that city includes all kinds of things, like having potable water and having a sewer system that maintains public health in the district, as well as a clean environment with the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. And it's in that context that the council legislated, but some members of Congress want to step in again, and just a piece, with a rider, without looking at the broader context. Because Congress is not running this city, and that's a good thing, but that means that they should keep their hands off the district. I want to say it's kind of unfortunate to be here because this should not be an annual event where we have to get together and make a statement clearly from the Congresswoman, who's been a great leader and defender of the city, and the local government, the mayor and the legislative branch. We shouldn't have to do this, but we do have to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. And Chairman Mendelson, we've been talking about guns, but he also mentioned one of the worst, most destructive riders. It took me 10 years to get it off, and that was a needle exchange rider. If you wonder why the district still has an epidemic, Baltimore does not, city poorer than we are, then it would be the needle exchange rider that kept the district from doing what it's doing today so well and driving down, tremendously driving down HIV/AIDS in our city. And I thank the city for what you have done now that that rider is gone. I'd like to ask Avery Gardner, co-president of the Brady Campaign and Center to Prevent Gun Violence. So you see you got two names. There's people who say I got two names too, Eleanor Holmes Norton, so I'm not going to complain. Please come up, Ms. Gardner.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next month, we will mark the one-year anniversary of an assassination attempt on Steve Scalise at a congressional baseball practice in Virginia. And the response to that shooting from Representative Tom Massey, a Republican from Kentucky, was to introduce legislation to allow people with concealed carry permits in any state to carry hidden, loaded guns in the District of Columbia, regardless of any training or other requirements that may or may not have been imposed by those other states. As a D.C. resident, I echo what the speakers have said before. The hypocrisy of trying to require D.C. to allow hidden guns, loaded, carried all over this town is a little crazy when you think about the fact that those same guns are not allowed in this building or in those other members' congressional offices. Now, I also note that tomorrow is the start of the NRA's annual convention in Texas. That will also be a gun-free zone, as declared by the Secret Service. Why doesn't D.C. have the right to determine where guns should be carried in its jurisdiction? Shouldn't we have those opportunities? Massey's bill is a dangerous one that will make all of us as residents of Washington, D.C. at greater risk. Now, on the Senate side, you've heard a bit about what Senator Rubio has done. He introduced legislation to negate D.C.'s gun laws. Just negate them. Senator Rubio, you have no right. This is our district, our home, not yours. You are our visitor and our guest, and we welcome you here. All we ask is that you respect and honor our rules while you're visiting. And of course, there is a companion bill to that Senate bill, and that was offered by Representative Tom Garrett, a Republican from Virginia. It would do the same thing. Brady is proud to stand with the district, with its citizens, with its locally elected leaders as part of the DC Votes Coalition, to demand that Congress respect our local authority and our local laws and to continue to allow us to determine how we will be governed in our fair city. Brady and our legal team has been very proud to help the city defend gun laws, sensible, common sense gun laws that save lives in the District of Columbia, against legal challenges. That includes standing here today and every day in opposition to any policy riders in the appropriations process that would limit DC's ability to keep its residents safe. Thank you, Congresswoman Norton, Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelson, and all of the DC Votes Coalition members for being here in unity on these important issues of self-rule and public safety.
I just want to say that our next speaker is not AWL from Woodrow Wilson High School, and if he needs an excuse, Aaron King, I will be pleased, the right one, saying that you were here saving lives for the residents of the District of Columbia. I'm pleased to invite Aaron King, who is leading the coalition here in the District of Columbia. Please come, Aaron.
Hello, everyone. As you all know, students around the country are continuing their efforts to encourage Congress to make tougher gun laws as a result of the Parkland shooting and many other school shootings that have occurred in the U.S. Students stood together on March 14th outside of their schools for 17 minutes. On March 24th, hundreds of thousands of students, their families and supporters participated in the March for Our Lives movement. And on April 7th, many students around the country conducted town hall meetings with their representatives to discuss ways to improve gun laws. DC students like myself are working to organize a town hall meeting with our representatives to provide students and the community an opportunity to learn more about what our representative in Congress and local leaders and organizations like Moms Demand Action are doing to protect and strengthen our current gun laws and to prevent members of Congress from changing the safety of the gun laws. Since Columbine and Sandy Hook, we have had approximately 10 school shootings per year. So far this year, we have already had 18 school shootings. As students in DC, we are affected by gun violence, not only at school, but as we go to and from our neighborhoods. And often, it's because teens have access to guns. A life is lost almost every day in DC to gun violence. Why would we, as students and citizens of DC, want to weaken our current gun laws? Why? Why would we, as students and citizens of DC, want to weaken our current gun laws? As I mentioned in March of this year, as students, we should not be focusing on our safety. Our focus should be on learning and graduating. Gun violence has become too normal for our society, and we need to change what is normal. Our normal should be that we all graduate from high school, prepare for a viable career, or go to college and finish. As a student, teen, and DC resident, I'm committed to continue what we have started. That is to ensure the safety of students and the citizens in our communities. We need everyone's continued support, so stay active and involved as we continue with our efforts to push Congress to strengthen our gun laws, not wipe them out. I encourage my peers who will be eligible this year to vote in November 2018. Remember, united, we stand a better chance to make change. Thank you.
Heavens, thank you, Aaron, for your leadership on this issue that is so vital to our city. I'd like to ask Georgianne Ursula, the Legislative Counsel of the American Civil Liberties Union, to come forward to speak on the district's Reproductive Non-Discrimination Act and attempts to overturn it.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union, I'd first like to thank Congresswoman Norton, Mayor Bowser, and Chairman Mendelson for their tireless efforts to protect civil rights and civil liberties of the residents of the District of Columbia, myself included. When D.C. passed the Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Amendment Act, it did so for a very simple, straightforward reason: to ensure that those who work in D.C. do not face workplace discrimination on the basis of their reproductive health care decisions or those of their family members. Everyone should have the ability to decide if, when, and how to start a family. And that means making decisions about whether to use birth control, whether to have an abortion, whether to become pregnant while unmarried, or to use in vitro fertilization, for example, without the fear of losing your job or facing other kinds of consequences from your employer. And yet women across the country have been fired or threatened at work for these kinds of private health decisions. By passing the Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Amendment Act, D.C. said, no, we won't let this happen in our city. Unfortunately, opponents of reproductive freedom in Congress have been trying to interfere ever since. They've tried to block D.C. from implementing its own law, first by attempting to pass a resolution of disapproval, and when that failed, by attempting to attach yet another dangerous anti-women's health policy rider to an annual appropriations bill. These now perennial efforts have been largely based on inaccurate claims that this law infringes on religious liberty. In fact, the opposite is true. The Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Amendment Act protects D.C. employees of all faiths by ensuring that they can follow their own religious or moral beliefs when making personal health care decisions, not be forced to follow those of their employers. Attempts to block this law are attempts to allow the use of religion to discriminate, something that we must oppose everywhere, including here in the district. And thanks to the leadership of Congresswoman Norton, combined with the united front of advocates for reproductive rights, for freedom of religion and belief, and all of the organizations in this room, this law stands. And it protects those who work in D.C. every day. And this year, should Congress once again attempt to meddle with this common sense anti-discrimination law, we are ready to once again stand together to say loud and clear, not here, not in our city, not in D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgianne, for helping us be so successful so far, and we're going to do it again. Could I ask Mark Glaze of the National Strategic Death with Dignity National Center? We're talking about a law in 7 states. Why would Congress want to keep us from passing a law that everybody else is allowed to have?
Afternoon. So I, as a consultant, I'm the National Strategy Director for the Death with Dignity National Center, which has been working for years to get this law passed in the district. This is a careful, as many of you know, it's a very narrow, carefully drawn law that allows a very small class of terminally ill D.C. residents to choose how they live their final days. As the Congresswoman said, I should also say I'm a D.C. resident. I've lived here for 25 years, and I have spent much of that time watching gentlemen who don't live anywhere near the District of Columbia try to tell me and many of you how to live. And for much of that time, I have watched the Congresswoman throw her body in front of those gentlemen, sometimes literally, I think, to get them to keep their hands off of our laws in this effort to override the Death with Dignity law, both through the authorization and the appropriations process is yet another example of that. As the Congresswoman said, Hawaii recently became the 7th state. Montana also recognizes this through judicial fiat, so 8 jurisdictions recognize this law. We anticipate a couple of other states will pass it this year. And this reflects the overwhelming public support nationally for these laws. Roughly 70% of the country wants this right for themselves if they become terminally ill. Roughly 70% of the District of Columbia residents support this law, and that's across demographic groups. So I don't want to give any energy to the folks who oppose these laws by mentioning them by names, but I won't. But the Congresswoman very accurately described who they are. They are social conservatives who are trying to raise their profile, build their careers, and raise money. It's a small group of people. We anticipate we will be able to keep this law on the books, working with these folks and many of you in the year to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And despite the fact that this law is controversial, I don't see any reason why controversial law, as well as a law everybody else agrees with, shouldn't stand in the District of Columbia. And thank you for your help in standing this law up and keeping it standing. Now we come to the two most difficult issues, and we've been clear that it may take a Democratic House to drive these out, and so we look at the polls and we're hopeful about this one. We don't assume, though, that we can't overturn Congress in this attempt, these two attempts as well. So I am going to ask the Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy, Planned Parenthood for America, Dana Singister, to come forward to talk about our amendment, or the perennial, the everlasting amendment. We got it taken off when Democrats were in power, then it got put right back on. This amendment that keeps the district from spending its own funds on abortion for low-income women. I want to emphasize that no jurisdiction can use federal funds. We ask to use our own money, and dozens of jurisdictions all across the United States do use their own money, so that Roe versus Wade is equally applied to all residents. Please come forward.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'm just thrilled to be here with my elected officials. It's really my honor to share this dais with you. My name is Dana Singiser, and I am speaking here today both as a D.C. resident as well as on behalf of Planned Parenthood's 11.5 million supporters, which I would note is more than twice as many as the NRA, our 2.4 million patients, and our 17,000 patients here in the district. 1 in 5 women have visited a Planned Parenthood health center at some point in her lifetime. In the district, our health care centers provide life-saving cancer screenings, preventive health care, including STI testing and treatment, birth control, and safe legal abortion. We work hard to ensure that these patients continue to have access to health care and education services, and to ensure that all women, no matter where they live, no matter how much money they make, can access the health care that they need without politicians getting in the way. Unfortunately, what we've seen in Congress are deeply unpopular and extremely damaging efforts to undermine people's health care and rights. In fact, just yesterday, hostile members of Congress sent a letter to the Trump-Pence administration calling for a domestic gag rule, a dangerous policy designed to block millions of women from accessing care at Planned Parenthood health centers. This policy would actually gag healthcare providers by taking away funds unless the provider agrees to never talk to patients about, never include any information on, or even mention the word abortion. Quite simply, telling doctors what they can and cannot say is dangerous to patients' health. Now, as we enter the fiscal year 19 appropriations process, once again, we expect to see more of the same. Far too long, extreme members of Congress have used the annual spending process to block the district from spending our own local funds on safe legal abortion. And that's why I'm here today, to tell Congress that the attacks to undermine access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including safe legal abortion, has no place in the appropriations process. While all other 50 states, as the Congresswoman mentioned, have the option to provide state funding for abortion, taxpayers in the district are denied that same opportunity to use our funds for those same services. This restriction is especially harmful for women with low incomes, women of color, and young people. Now, a majority of people actually support equitable access to abortion coverage, and that support is even stronger among millennials and people of color, including Latinos, African Americans, and AAPI people. Unfortunately, this attack on the district is one of only many harmful riders that threaten people's health and rights. From attacking contraception access, abortion, and targeting the providers that millions of people rely on each year, it is time for Congress to stop pushing these wildly unpopular policy riders. The public wants their leaders to build on the tremendous progress we've made to expand access to health care in this country, not to take us back. Planned Parenthood is going to fight for our patients' health and rights and for the millions of people in this country who need access to quality reproductive health care. We believe that our bodies are our own and should not be at the mercy of any politician. I want to thank the Congresswoman, the Mayor, and the Chairman for being here today and for your tireless advocacy for our patients and for all of the residents of the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. The thanks goes to you because this has been such a long-standing, excuse me, fight here in the District of Columbia. The other long-standing fight, but not nearly as long, because the council passed this bill only a few years ago, and I'm referring to marijuana reform. As you see across the United States, jurisdiction after jurisdiction, I think almost a dozen now, have come on board for marijuana reform. Marijuana is essentially legal in the United States. Young people use it. They normally are not arrested for it. By the way, we must have 7 or 8 universities in the District of Columbia. Need I tell you? Need I say anything further? Now, the council was responsive to 2 studies done by outside organizations on their own that found that 90% of those arrested for possession of marijuana in the District of Columbia were African Americans. Why would that occur? It occurred because police smelled it or saw it. If people were smoking outdoors, and the places which they patrol more often than others, of course, are places where there may be more crime, and sometimes those turn out to be African American communities. The council was immediately responsive and simply brought us in line with what jurisdictions across the United States are beginning to do. And of course, the Congress stepped in and tried to take away this bill. What we did was to find a flaw in the rider that was used. So we were able to keep in place the 2 ounces of marijuana that the council passed, which residents can possess, but we cannot in this city commercialize marijuana as is happening all across the United States. So I'm going to ask Caitlin Bowker, who is a policy manager of Drug Policy Alliance, if she would come forward and speak to this rider.
Thank you, and thank you to the chairman for explicitly mentioning needle exchange as a drug policy that Congress has interfered with, which directly led to the deaths of thousands of people in the infection with HIV. It's absolutely outrageous that Congress continues to meddle in our ability to legislate on local drug policy, especially in the midst of an opioid overdose crisis. But I'm here today to talk about Congress's most recent attempt at interference in our drug policy laws on marijuana. In November 2014, in a triumph for racial justice and criminal justice, district voters overwhelmingly adopted Ballot Initiative 71, and it legalized the possession, the use, and the cultivation of marijuana for adults over the age of 21. But because district law prevents our ballot initiatives from spending or taxing, our ballot initiative legalized marijuana, but it didn't actually establish a regulatory system, a step that, of course, the council intended to take, but they were prevented from doing so by Congress. In late 2014, appropriators blocked our lawmakers from using locally raised public funds to tax and regulate marijuana or enact other important reforms by including a rider in the annual spending bill, a rider that has now been included in every subsequent spending bill. This has left the district in a state of limbo in which it's legal for adults to possess, use, and cultivate marijuana, but the sale of marijuana remains both illicit and unregulated. Unlike the 8 other American jurisdictions that have reaped enormous benefits from establishing a regulated market, including generating thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions in tax revenue, congressional meddling has prevented the district from doing the same. Congressional interference has undermined the will of the voters, left the district unable to legislate on a critical public health issue, and established a system that would raise tax revenue, help law enforcement, and keep our residents safe. Instead of having a strictly regulated market with product testing, age verification, and limits on advertising, the district is left in a gray area with unregulated sales of untested products and an increasing number of marijuana arrests. Marijuana legalization is no longer an experiment in this country. It is a proven policy that over 60 million Americans in 9 states live under. Congress must end its interference with the district's laws and remove the rider so our local lawmakers can move forward with a comprehensive regulatory regime for marijuana. District residents should enjoy the same rights that 60 million other Americans enjoy. Thank you.
Appreciate those remarks, Caitlin. Our final speaker is one who is working to make sure we never have to come here again because we'd become the 51st state. And we are overqualified to become the 51st state because we are number 1 per capita in taxes paid to support the United States of America. I believe that even most residents don't even know that. So please spread the word that we get much of our energy from knowledge of that important number, which is the number that led the framers to create the United States of America in the first place: no taxation without representation. I'm going to ask Bo Shuff, who's up here trying to make sure we get free at last, to come forward and speak to us now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name, as mentioned, is Bo Shuff, and I serve as the Executive Director of DC Vote. We are the district's advocacy and education organization working to ensure the equality for all residents. Our work focuses on the second-class citizenship of district residents, and we believe that the permanent solution to this injustice is statehood, and we are working towards that end. First, let me thank Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton for the invitation to participate in today's press conference and for her tireless leadership for autonomy for the district. Just like the cherry blossoms bloom, humidity starts to roll in, the tourists begin to visit, and Congress messes with D.C. Welcome to summer in the district. Thank you as well to Mayor Bowser and Chairman Mendelson. Your tireless work on statehood has injected new energy into our movement, and we look forward to continuing to see increased investments in the effort in the future. I'm also pleased to join the other organizations present today: the ACLU, the Brady Campaign, Planned Parenthood, Death with Dignity National Center, and the Drug Policy Alliance. All focus on issues that we, as district residents, through our elected officials, have decided for ourselves. We hold elections, we introduce legislation, we conduct hearings, and we enact laws that represent the values of the 700,000 people that call the district home. However, the Hypocrisy Caucus in the United States Congress sees things differently. These are the members who champion local control but block local laws. They are the ones who talk about the idea that the best government is the government closest to the people, yet overrule government when it helps them score political points. And they are the ones who support one gun law in their state, but another for our district. It is the caucus who would tattoo states' rights on their arm if it thought it would get them more votes, yet deny statehood and the equality that comes with it to the residents of the district. But we know what the solution is to end this ridiculous rider cycle every year. It's statehood. It's full equality for the residents of the district. And we're moving forward like never before. 158 members of the House of Representatives and 22 United States senators support statehood as co-sponsors. That's more than any previous bill, and it's more than any previous vote on statehood for the district. More organizations have signed on to support statehood than ever before as well. Organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, Service Employees International Union, Democracy for America, and 29 other national, regional, and local organizations know that their issues and the issues that their members care about are only fully supported if the district residents are not left behind. Today, we call on members of Congress and organizational leaders who believe in equality and fairness for all Americans to support statehood for the District of Columbia and end the rider cycle that we live under. Thank you again to Representative Norton, Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelson, and the leadership of the organizations here today. I look forward to working with all of you to preserve what we have enacted and to move forward towards equality. Thank you.
And let me thank the mayor, the city council chair, and particularly all of you who have spoken here today. If there are any questions, anyone who spoke will take them.
Congresswoman Norton, if any of these initiatives ever were to get to President Trump, of course, he'd have to sign them into law. Do you have any sense of what he thinks about D.C., the District of Columbia, relative to its lack of home rule and all of the other issues that you brought up?
Not much, and I don't think he spends much time thinking about the District of Columbia. As it turns out, the Trump Hotel was a District of Columbia building. Little did we know when Congress advertised it, saying whoever wants to come forward with the most money to fix up this hotel, come forward, that it would be President Trump. And actually, I met him at that time. He seemed perfectly sane and civil. He has not particularly gone out after the District of Columbia. This year, he has attached 4 riders, I believe it is 4 riders, to his bill. I think he's kind of catching on. Why don't I jump into the fray? I suffer no illusions that he would, were a bill to get through here, perhaps veto it. But frankly, if such a bill were to get through here, I think members of Congress would already have spoken with him, and that it would mean that the president would be on board. I don't think any of that will happen until the Democrats recapture the House, and the polls are showing a possibility of that. Is there anything you want to ask any of the speakers who have spoken today? Thank you very much for coming.